My name is Sydney Colussi. I'm a researcher at the University of Sydney Business School, and it is a pleasure to be participating in the Dignified Menopause Summit and presenting on behalf of myself, Associate Professor Elizabeth Hill, and Professor Marion Baird at the University of Sydney. Our presentation is titled Menopause in the Workplace, Engendering the Right to Work Across the Reproductive Life Cycle. We know the right to work forms an inseparable and inherent part of human dignity, and in this respect is fundamental to the idea of dignified menopause. Recognizing this, our presentation draws on feminist theories of social reproduction and reproductive justice to develop a critical reading of the right to work that takes menopause into account and reclaims the importance of the reproductive body for all workers across the life cycle. We argue this reading helps to engender the right to work and advance the principle of substantive equality by accommodating the reproductive body at all stages of life and addressing inequalities related to difference. We make these arguments in the context of global trends in population aging and women's increased labor force participation, which increases the likelihood of people going through menopause in the workplace. We also make these arguments in the context of growing evidence that menopause is an under-recognized source of inequality at work, including material disadvantages related to menopausal symptoms and negative stereotypes and attitudes toward menopausal workers. It's important to note these issues are shaped by geographical and socioeconomic context. For example, whether an individual works in the formal or informal economy is particularly important in shaping their experience at work and determining whether the human right to work will offer any tangible protection. Though different challenges arise in different contexts, our presentation aims to make menopause visible as both a gender equality and human rights issue that may impact labor force participation across the world. To advance an interpretation of the right to work that draws attention to menopause, we need to think about the interface between production and reproduction across the life cycle. We know, for example, that the reproductive body and biological processes that are gendered female are key sites for reinforcing inequality at work. In part, this is because workplaces and organizations are traditionally ordered around the so-called ideal worker who has no reproductive body or caring obligations. There is a considerable body of feminist scholarship that explores discrimination related to reproduction at work, particularly focusing on reproductive rights related to pregnancy and postnatal health. However, our presentation opens up this space and adopts a life cycle approach to reproduction in order to focus on areas where more work is needed, including the relationship between work and menopause. Social reproduction theory is helpful in understanding the relationship between work and the reproductive body because it helps to challenge the strict separation of the productive and reproductive spheres and broadens the notion of reproduction to recognize its biological and social elements. This means recognizing that all humans are embodied and reproductive beings at both work and home who contribute to the reproduction of the labor force through both biological and social reproduction, including unpaid care work. In terms of biological reproduction and its relationship with the labor market, pregnancy and childbirth is well theorized, but other markers of reproductive embodiment, including menopause, are underexplored. Several factors explain the limited visibility of menopause in the labor market and in the human rights framework, including the comparative visibility of pregnancy and the value to society of having children, but also the stigmatization of menstruation and menopause and their relegation to the private sphere. Despite these challenges, it's important to explore the role of menopause in shaping the right to work. If menopause is contributing to inequality and stigma in the workplace, this may exacerbate economic insecurity at a critical stage of life when many older women are taking on additional unpaid caring responsibilities at home, which may already constrain their ability to participate in the labor market. To challenge the status quo of the ideal worker, which would have us ignore menopause at work, we refer to reproductive justice theory, which allows us to examine the relationship between menopause, reproduction, and the right to work through an intersectional lens. This conceptual framework allows us to explore the material consequences of embodiment and inequalities related to biological difference, while also avoiding essentialist accounts of menopause and recognizing inequalities at the intersections of age, race, class, ability, sexual orientation, and gender identity. This means recognizing, for example, that menopause is a potential workplace equality issue, not just for cisgender women, but also for individuals in the transgender, gender diverse, and non-binary community. Recognizing the complex relationship between production and reproduction, we now turn to the human rights framework, where the right to work is enshrined in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and the Convention to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women. Though the right to work does not guarantee an unconditional right to employment, it does guarantee right of access, which means the reproductive body and its functions, including menopause, must not act as a barrier to employment. In terms of recognizing and accommodating the reproductive body, it is important to note a life cycle approach to sexual and reproductive health and labor market participation has been adopted in both international labor law and human rights law. However, when it comes to the interaction of work and the reproductive body, there is a clear emphasis on maternal health, including pregnancy, childbirth, lactation, and child rearing. While these are extremely important issues, we argue this is a narrow understanding of reproduction that threatens to overlook gendered inequalities related to other stages of the reproductive life cycle, including menopause and the years beyond fertility and childbearing. To challenge this limited conception of reproduction at work, we argue for a critical reading of the right to work that draws attention to menopause and the reproductive body across the life cycle. In the tradition of social reproduction theory, this interpretation will help to further collapse the distinction between the productive and reproductive spheres, while also addressing inequalities related to reproduction at work and challenging the status quo of the ideal worker. Ideally, this interpretation will help to engender the right to work and advance the principle of substantive equality by recognizing gendered inequalities related to reproductive and menopausal embodiment in the workplace. Starting with the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the right to work and just and favorable conditions at work are provided for in Articles 6 and 7. In terms of ensuring equality at work, these articles must be read in conjunction with Articles 2.2 and 3 of the Covenant, which respectively guarantee non-discrimination and equality of men and women in the exercise of socioeconomic rights. However, this interpretive requirement does little to enhance our understanding of rights relating to the reproductive body at work. We find more guidance referring to General Comments 18 and 23 on the right to work and just and favorable working conditions, which address the issue of reproduction in the workplace in a bit more detail. Significantly, both comments recognize the cumulative effects of gender inequality and highlight the need to address gender-based discrimination across the life cycle, including age discrimination. Despite this, interpreting Articles 6 and 7 through these general comments reveals a fairly narrow understanding of reproduction at work. Beyond a passing reference to women's hygiene needs, both comments focus on the need for maternity protection and anti-discrimination measures related to pregnancy and breastfeeding, as well as parental leave benefits to reconcile work and family obligations. Though the references to a life cycle approach are significant, the general comments reveal an underlying assumption that reproduction in the workplace is synonymous with pregnancy and maternal health, which overlooks potential inequalities related to other stages of the reproductive life cycle, including menopause. However, I argue a more critical reading that broadens our understanding of reproduction and challenges the silencing of menopause at work may be possible by reading Articles 6 and 7 in conjunction with General Comment 22 on the right to sexual and reproductive health, which goes much further in adopting a life cycle approach to reproduction. Though General Comment 22 also focuses on maternal health in the workplace, it highlights the need for states to address inequalities and social barriers related to stigmatized biological processes across the life cycle, including menstruation and, by extension, menopause as well. Read together with Articles 6 and 7, this comment helps to expand our understanding of reproduction in the workplace beyond pregnancy and maternal health to include menopause. Drawing on theories of social reproduction and reproductive justice, it also challenges us to think critically about how stigmatized aspects of reproduction are contributing to inequality at work, and how these inequalities manifest depending on socioeconomic context and individual circumstances. We now turn to the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW. Unlike other human rights treaties, CEDAW is focused exclusively on the rights of women, and for this reason, human reproduction and its relationship with gender inequality is a key organizing concept. Throughout the text of the Convention, there is an emphasis on eliminating gendered discrimination related to maternal health, pregnancy, procreation, and parenthood in all areas of life, including paid work. The text of Article 11, which focuses on eliminating discrimination against women in employment, specifically addresses reproduction at two levels. In subsection 1F, it calls for the safeguarding of the function of reproduction in the workplace, and in subsection 2, calls for the elimination of discrimination against women on grounds of pregnancy or maternity leave. Here we see a familiar pattern emerge in the text of Article 11 and across the Convention as a whole, which reveals a fairly limited understanding of reproduction but focuses on pregnancy and maternal health. Like the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the CEDAW Committee has recognized the importance of eliminating gender discrimination across the life cycle in several of its general recommendations. But in the context of reproduction and employment, there remains an overwhelming emphasis on maternal health, which risks overlooking workplace inequality at other stages of the reproductive life cycle. However, I suggest a critical reading of Article 11 that expands our understanding of reproduction beyond pregnancy and acknowledges menopause might be supported by reading it together with General Recommendations 24 and 27 on the right to health and the rights of older women. Significantly, General Recommendation 24 recognizes menstruation and menopause as biological factors that may affect the health rights of women, while General Recommendation 27 states that postmenopausal and post-reproductive health conditions are frequently overlooked in research and policy development. General Recommendation 27 also notes that states parties have an obligation to facilitate the participation of women in paid work without discrimination on the basis of age and gender. These recommendations are important because they help to make menopause and the post-reproductive stage of the life cycle more visible in the human rights framework. Read together with Article 11, these recommendations highlight the importance of addressing gendered ageism related to menopause in the workplace, and also recognizing menopause as a unique biological factor that may affect labor force participation and equality at work. Given the importance of human reproduction to the Convention as a whole, these recommendations should prompt us to push the boundaries of reproduction beyond pregnancy and maternity to recognize stigmatized aspects of the life cycle that are typically ignored or overlooked in the public sphere. In this respect, it is particularly significant that General Recommendation 27 acknowledges that the reproductive health concerns for older women are often neglected in research and policy. This suggests a systemic failure to accommodate the reproductive bodies of all people at all stages of life. Unless states recognize and engage with discrimination related to menopause and the post-reproductive stage of the life cycle, it seems as though we will be unable to address gendered inequalities at the intersection of sexism and ageism in the workplace. In this presentation, I have attempted to draw attention to menopause in the human rights framework by advancing an interpretation of the right to work that acknowledges menopause and the reproductive body across the life cycle. Drawing on feminist theories of social reproduction and reproductive justice, I have argued that we must continue to challenge the division of the productive and reproductive spheres and understand how inequalities related to reproductive embodiment manifest at different stages of life. The purpose of this interpretation is to help engender the right to work by advancing the principle of substantive equality and addressing inequalities related to biological difference and reproduction at work. In the context of growing social awareness, we hope this presentation demonstrates the importance of understanding the relationship between work and the reproductive body across the life cycle, and how this might help to promote gender and age-diverse workforces moving forward. Finally, I would like to thank the organizers of the Dignified Menopause Summit for coordinating this important event, which allows us to see menopause through a human rights lens. Thank you.